So now that we have a sense for why we want to write content and language objectives, we're going to focus in this video on some things to keep in mind as you're writing content objectives for your unit. So here's a few characteristics of effective content objectives. And again, content objectives are focusing on the knowledge or skills that you want students to learn as a result of the lesson. So one important characteristic is that effective content objectives are observable or measurable. I always caution students and teachers that I work with to not use words like understand, because understand is something that's hard to measure. I can't tell if a student understands something because I can't get inside their brain and see if they're understanding it, but I can tell if they can define something, describe something, if they can identify something. So there's other more measurable verbs that we can use to help us focus on what we're actually going to be able to observe or measure. So here you see use define, identify, match, not learn, know, or understand. Content objectives that are effective are also connected to grade level standards. We want to make sure that we are teaching things that are grade level academic learning for our students. So we always do want to go back to our standards when we're planning our instruction. And they're also presented to students. Content objectives and objectives in general are not meant just for the teacher to have a sense for where the lesson is heading, but they should be presented to students in some way so that students also have a roadmap for the learning. So it's important to think about the age of the students. So presenting them in student-friendly language, presenting them orally and in writing. So having them written somewhere where students can see them and also stating them aloud. The best teachers that I've worked with also come back to them at the end of the lesson. So they're not just introducing a lesson by being really clear about what the learning goals are, but also come back to them at the end to think about, did we actually learn what we set out to learn? And they're introduced and restated in multiple ways. So they're repeated. So students might repeat back what the objective is. You might have students explain them in their own words. They might be explained by the teacher. So there's multiple ways that the content objectives are engaged with. And of course, they're assessed during the lesson. So we want to know if our objective was effective. And to do that, we should have some way of assessing student learning during the lesson. Another thing to keep in mind with content objectives is to make sure that you are thinking about higher order thinking as well. So this is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, a framework that was developed to help support teachers in thinking about the way that knowledge can be organized or the different ways that we learn. And the taxonomy has these different levels of complexity, moving towards higher level thinking. So at the very basic level of learning and knowledge generation, we have remembering something or understanding something. And you see here next to these words, what that might look like in terms of practice or in terms of what a student might do. So recalling a basic facts, explaining an idea. And as we move up the triangle, you see that the rigor of what is being asked, or the cognitive load of what's being asked, becomes more complex, right? Now I'm being asked to apply something, analyze, evaluate, and at the very top, create. So how this is useful for content objective planning is that we want to make sure that we're not just staying down in the remember and the understand categories. You want to make sure that as you're writing content goals, you're thinking about, am I moving students towards analyzing something, towards evaluating something? The first few lessons of a unit might be more focused on understanding and remembering, but as we advance, am I moving towards that higher order thinking? All right, and the last thing I wanted to share is just a very brief video example of a teacher reviewing objectives with students, just so you can see one way that a teacher builds in this kind of objective review with the students, so students know what the learning focus is. There are many, many ways to do this, but here's just one example, if it isn't already something that's a part of your teaching practice. So let me see how I can get there. All right.
SWABOT. So this is something that has been just really effective in our classroom. We have on our whiteboard a box that says SWABOT. SWABOT.
Swim back. Students will be able to capitalize proper nouns. SWABAT.
SWABAT stands for students will be able to. And it states what our objective or our learning goal is for a particular lesson.
During this period, SWABAT.
I will say and write the objective and students will repeat it.
Identify.
It sort of has a rhythmic tone to it. It just signals to students' brains, okay, this is our goal for the next 15, 30, 45 minutes.
What do I capitalize?
The more we could be transparent with students, the more we model metacognition and we get them thinking about their own thinking and learning, we also help them become more effective.
SWABAT.
All right. And so in wrapping up, I wanted to point you to a resource that is also available on Brightspace. So I always find it helpful myself when I'm writing objectives to have a list of really strong content verbs that I can use when I'm writing my content goals for students. And so here you can see a set of action verbs that match each of those levels of Bloom's taxonomy that you can use as you're writing your content objectives. So I'll put this in Brightspace so that you have access to this as well. And I hope that it's useful.